Good morning, everybody, or afternoon or evening, depending on where in the world you are. This is Carrie Getz, and today I have a great guest. We're talking to Tony Grayson. Tony, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody?
Hi, Carrie, and thanks for having me. I'm Tony Grayson. I actually did 21 years in the United States Navy. My lifelong
Thank you for
goal
your
was
service.
thank you. My lifelong goal was to command my own submarine, and I did that. But then of those 4 years, I probably spent about 80% of my time out at sea, and so I actually got out right after my command tour to spend more time with my family. And since then, I've worked at jobs at Facebook slash Meta, AWS, then Oracle. Most recently, I'm at running my own business underneath the Compass data centers.
Nice, nice. So, how'd you get into mission critical? You
I
talk
think
about leaving. I mean, that's got to be a jump,
oh,
right?
I think for the military, I mean, it's on submarines you are mission critical all the time. That's kind of gets drilled into you, ever since you graduate from college and you go into submarines. That it's you start with the plant. You start how do you run a nuclear plant, and that is high up time, of course. It's your only source of
Yeah,
power underway, so
that's
you got to
pretty
keep it
important when you're
going.
under the water, right?
So yeah, you're kind of born into mission critical, where you kind of you get it and it makes sense to you. And so that's kind of why I think, at least on the nuclear side, why there's so many nukes in the data center business. It's just it's a natural transition.
Yeah, I think definitely a lot of those parallels can be drawn to this industry. And that's something a lot of companies don't really realize. If you've got veterans coming back from service, a lot of those skills are portable. A lot of those habits are desirable. And people kind of forget those parallels. And now that we have these massive talent shortages, I think those are all things to consider for sure.
No, definitely, and it's not just Navy nukes. I think the military instills in its people a very good discipline in how to get things done. I mean, it's there. You could be in a motor pool in the Army and still have that same kind of mission critical kind of expertise, and one thing I also love about the military is that it really teaches you that service above self. So you tend to, and I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with people come out of the regular industry, electricians and mechanical, and coming into the data center industry. I just think it's a natural progression, and you really get that great attitude with the veterans coming in. And I think they're willing to do anything, and they're willing to stay long hours. They're willing to do probably more than it's expected of them, and they're willing to try really hard because they kind of put that same attitude, that same kind of gusto they had in the military in their jobs.
So if we took, say, for instance, that you got out, you started in this mission critical job. Let's talk about that transition because clearly commanding a submarine and managing a data center are a tad different. So talk about your path, how you got there. And then I think probably a lot of those people listening, as you're explaining these steps, would like to know some of those challenges along the way and kind of help them prepare if they're getting into these roles and getting into the industry.
That makes sense. And so, the first thing I will say on the transition piece, it's different. We all like to tell ourselves that, we've done operations, we've done leadership, we've done kind of program management through, when you've been in the shipyard. It's very, very different. And I think the big thing you want to do when you first get out is understand it's different and don't react too quickly. I was very lucky at Facebook, where I was originally hired to go run EMEA facilities, but because of my background, I kind of got taken into more of the design aspect, and so kind of fiber, ISP, OSP, design, construction, operations, that kind of stuff. But I think that comes to our versatility, which I also want to talk about. But I think in the military, everyone's the same. We all come from different backgrounds, but we go to boot camp, and there's a reason we go to boot camp. It's because we're all taught to think and be the same. So you might think you're leading a diverse team, but you aren't. And I think that is kind of the first realization that kind of hit me was, you know, all the stuff we've been thought about, all the stuff we've been taught about, that this leadership will help prepare you. It does to a certain extent, but it doesn't, because, what do you do with that first person that you're dealing with that thinks very, very differently than you? And I don't think we get well prepared for that kind of solution. So my first advice is don't just react, understand what's going on before you kind of make decisions. Because that's the same thing with finances. I mean, in business, you have a true P&L in a submarine. It's like, I want I want $100,000 valve. It's like, no one's going to, you put the order in, you manage some fake budget, but the money is always going to come, and the parts are always going to come. Not necessarily so in the business side as well. And kind of the operations is different too. And so, go back to Facebook. I was very, very lucky. My boss, a guy named Richard Miles, was like, well, we don't want you to do anything for 4 months. And I was like, what are you talking about 4 months? They're like, no, we want you to be an IC, an individual contributor for 4 months. So you could actually learn how things happen and why we do things a certain way. And I was like, ooh, I've seen this before. Well, we've seen it, but it's different on the outside. And so I probably would have made some really stupid decisions and rub people somewhat the wrong way. If I would have kind of come in and kind of with guns ablazing and treating it like it's back on my submarine again. So I think, my first piece of advice is really take some time to learn the why people are doing things. Be curious, ask a bunch of questions, and you're going to learn a lot because you need to learn a lot before you kind of really get out there and start doing the job.
But that's got to be like, even emotionally, that's got to be quite an adjustment going from being in command to being an observer and learning something brand new. So
I think,
even though
I
you
think,
kind of get that thought process in the military and in a lot of jobs, to be fair, certain ways to do things, certain way to think of things. Certainly in this industry, there are as many opinions as there are probably people in this industry.
yep.
And so, why people do things the way they do. It's one thing to bring somebody in and say, hey, look, here's 4 months. We're going to train you on your job. We're going to show you everything you know. And then on the day after that 4 weeks, you're like, okay, this is really great. But are they receptive to the but?
I mean, I think it's, and, I think, coming from the military, we have this opinion that we have to lead these large teams, and you don't have to. Individual contributors on the outside sometimes are more than a manager and actually have more business impacts. I think the first thing that people need to learn is they really have to check their ego at the door. I don't care if you led a team of 1,500, of 6 submarines, and you're in the Navy for, let's say, 26 years, and you come in, you might lead a team of 2, and that's okay. People. So I think military, people who are successful really kind of learn to check that ego, understand they still have a lot to learn, and understand that, it's okay. Your boss might be younger than you, that person is there for a certain reason, and you could probably learn a lot from them. I mean, I'm a big believer in we're always learning. And so if you, kind of treat it like that, when you're going in and understand that you need to check that ego, I think those people kind of tend to do a lot better. And, the one thing we do great in the military is, we get parachuted into a new job every 2 years. So our ability to kind of learn, pick stuff up and run is pretty amazing. So, you just have to trust in yourself that you will succeed, kind of coming down the road. You just got to, check that ego and learn that, you might have to start off a little lower, and maybe that's okay, and learn it and get better and improve. But you'll quickly pick it up, and your learning rate your learning rate will be kind of, exponential from my perspective.
Yeah, I think that's true pretty much in any job. And I would say too that I've always encourage people, have a diversity of thought, have people from not just different walks of life, different age groups, different background experience, different educational experiences. And, I think that's one thing that's been really good with the Great Resignation and the skills trouble in our industry is that where we've really lacked in some of that diversity of thought, I think we're starting to realize we got to get out of ourselves or we're not going to have anybody to run our companies in a few years. So,
No, yeah, and I would agree with that. And I think, you have to understand your personality type, and there's plenty of systems that are out there doing it. The most one I'm used to right now is the DISC kind of survey on kind of what your personality type is. The last thing you want is everyone in the same room with the same personality, because then you're going to get groupthink. You're always going to be high-fiving each other how smart you are, but there's probably better ways to do it. And that, people who think differently is what you want. You want to be challenged. You want people to ask why. You want them to be curious, because that's how you get a good product. You don't get a good product by a bunch of yes people sitting around staring at each other because you both think, it might seem like it's going to go quicker, but that's not what you want.
yeah, and I think companies forget that too because, your consumers are definitely not all homogenous either. They're from all walks of life. They do all kinds of crazy things, and they might not even use your product for what you intended it to be used for. So
Yeah. And I think no one's malicious out there. And I think when you get some people, you get annoyed at some people, that's just probably a different personality type that looks at the world slightly different than you. And you should be paying attention to that person because they could really have a much better idea than you do. But yeah, to your point, this is, I've done the personality definitely through my career, but where I'm at right now with Compass is probably the best company that I've seen that is able to really employ that. And everyone wears, you don't necessarily wear the badge and everything, but you actually have on the side of the office doors back in the office, you actually have what the personality type is. And so you could, if I'm talking to you, I know exactly your personality type and my personality type, how we get along, how we might, kind of rub each other the wrong way, how we can better work together. And I think that stuff is priceless.
it really is, and I think it doesn't get as encouraged as much these days as it does. I think a lot of people have sort of scaled back a bit because of cancel culture, whatever you want to call the whole thing. A lot of people are sort of internalizing their feelings, which may not be the best thing to do, and internalizing ideas, and certainly not the best for a company. I read this book years ago, something, I'm paraphrasing the title because I don't remember it exactly, but something like, if it ain't broke, break it. And this company went out and gave their employees incentives to find things wrong and come up with a solution. And they were very lucrative incentives. And that's how they did their product, development, and figured out new things. And, I hope people listening kind of take that advice, and that don't stifle your feelings or your thoughts. Just be respectful with them. I mean, we all have different feelings and we can all agree to disagree, but that's a little different from the military and the private sector, because you're not really encouraged to think independently in the military area.
And that's something I struggle with daily, is, we're so, you're so used to saying I and going to execute, because time could mean, it could be mission success, or even, between mission success and failure, or someone could get hurt or killed at the worst case. And so, but I work on that every day, how to break that. How do you tell your boss no, that you did completely disagree and here's another way to do it? I mean, they don't hire people to be yes people. They want that. They might not think they want it, but in the end, they want that kind of critical feedback. They want you asking questions. They want you questioning decisions. And that's what you need to be doing out there, is essentially being curious. Why is that? Why is that? Why is that? The 5 whys, which we kind of were taught in the military, definitely apply out here. And so just because someone's senior, just because they're the CEO, they want you to push back. They want you to ask those kind of questions. And I think that's something that, I've been out of the Navy for, I guess, almost 7 years now, that every day I have to work on to struggle. That am I saying yes because I really agree to it? Or am I saying yes because, I have this military thing of beaten into me, which is the, salute and carry on.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because it leads to all that critical thinking and all of those challenges that just really upset the apple cart and make things better, hopefully.
I would hopefully. And like I said, no one comes to work saying they want to do a bad job. No one comes to work and saying, well, I'm going to screw this up today because I think it'll be awesome. Or I just feel like, half-assed. No one does that. I mean, and so you have to ask yourself, if something happens, how they get to that position, or why they got that position, Carrie, that's something I have to work on every day, that, the military teaches you, to basically say I and execute. And the reason you do that is because sometimes, time and path to actions that between mission success and mission failure at worst someone's life. And so that's something I have to work on every single day, that, your boss does not hire you to be a yes person. Your boss hires you for your critical thinking. If you think you have a better idea, you should push back. And I find that it's hard for me to do a lot of times, to push back, ask a lot of questions. And so it's a very, very conscious, thought to me, is if I think I don't understand something, you ask those questions, because we have to be okay with being wrong or looking stupid, or because there's really no stupid questions. I know we talk about it all the time, but it really is true. And ask the why, the 5 whys that you kind of learned back in the military days, to figure out what the intent is. And then if you have a better idea, bring it in there. I mean, that's what they hire you for. And I think that's something that military people across the board from every service kind of struggle in, is that kind of critical thinking, that kind of questioning attitude, to make sure they're really helping the business and not just carrying the baton, if you will.
I think too, when you look at some of those changes, it's very different between a process and a procedure, right? Something that's been pretty well defined. It's kind of the standard, de facto standard, so to speak. And then trying to change some of those processes that have long held, and certainly across multiple sites. And, all of those present specific challenges.
Yeah, and I would agree with that statement. And I think you have to understand, what can be bettered upon and what can't be bettered upon, and how do you even ensure those procedures that are well documented and used? How do you make sure that they follow through? And I share an example. This was a cutover for a data center that we had the IT equipment in, and they were cutting over to new switchgear, or they were cutting over switchgear for maintenance. And, it's supposed to be two people carrying on. So we practiced it a couple times. They had the mop, they had the procedure. But when it came down to execution time, guess what? It was on one person. The person didn't have the procedure. They went into the long electrical room and opened the wrong breaker. And, we lost a lot of racks, let's just say. So how do you present that kind of thing? And it's a human thing. You practice it a bunch of times and you have a procedure. And so, what you want to do is really try to eliminate those kind of errors. And so when you're talking those procedures, and that are documented, how do you make it easy on the people so they can't mess it up, and how do you provide that kind of critical oversight so they don't mess it up?
And so do you find that different, like in the military? Is it more sort of rubric, tiny little, these are your small bit of tasks and here's 10 people to do the other 10 that go with that? And then now in the private sector, it's like, here's 10 tasks, get it done.
No, I think the difference really is in the military is you have the task, but you have a lot of people to help do it. I think in the civilian sector, what you try to do is you want to minimize your OpEx. You minimize your OpEx by eliminating headcount. And so you have a lot less people to do a lot more jobs in a lot more space. And so, if someone is trying to get home quickly, maybe they might cut corners, and you don't want that to happen, but you can't put a person in that situation. So, one thing I think we need to look at critically across our industry is, are you really saving that much by cutting headcount? Why can't you have two people on shift? Why can't you have two people working together? And that really is it's not, checkers or oversight, and people aren't malicious, but, given the choice, for going home early and getting something done, they're going to try to get something done so they can go home early. And maybe, I'm not saying everyone's going to do this or anything like that, but don't put someone in that kind of situation where they have to choose between family and work and that kind of stuff. Definitely kind of not the direction I know you want to talk about, but I think we really got to be smarter in our industry about how do we eliminate these errors? How do we put people in these situations? And knowing that everyone, kind of wants to be successful and wants to do a good job, how do you enable that to happen?
And I think too, a lot of those very specific policies and procedures certainly help. Not everybody's there yet. And I think too, that we also really have to look at a couple things. One, we know that most errors are human errors anyway. So what can we do to get rid of those? How can we make these more process related than, here's a vague task, go sort it out kind of thing. Yeah. But, and that goes to supporting your employees for sure. And the attrition rate in our industry is not stellar, especially for women in the industry, and the amount of hours that companies expect people to work. I mean, you just can't expect people not to have errors. So, going from a military background where you might be up for, 24 hours, 48 hours, what would your suggestion be to folks that are used to that, to not get caught in that trap of, sure, I'll work 80 hours, because it's not sustainable. You get burnout at my age.
It's not sustainable. It's not something you want to do. I mean, you might get paid by the hour and you might want that overtime, but are you really critically thinking at that time? And some people maybe you can do it, but life's not about making money and working there. Life's about, living life and spending time with your family and doing things. And so I think it's easy to fall in that trap where you just repeat that, but you shouldn't want to do that kind of stuff. You really need a good work-life balance, because in the end, it's going to come back and hurt you. And it might come back and hurt you because, from an operational procedure, you might just get complacent. Or, you might pass yourself 5 years and wonder what the heck happened in the last 5 years. And I think, so you need to be, as a manager or when you're working with those teams, you need to make sure that they're taking the time and putting themselves and their family first. Don't let them fall out of that military trap because it's too easy to do.
Yeah, it's easy in civilian life too. Trust me.
No, to be honest, I think, I freely admit that I have definitely worked 80, 90, 100-hour work weeks. And I'm not proud of that kind of fact. And I thought I had to do it, but in kind of, retrospectively, I probably didn't have to do it. I could have worked a lot smarter than harder, kind of got a great example is, kind of, we've all been in this something when you're preparing a presentation or you're preparing an idea to present that you don't want to get people's feedback because you want to get all the data, but then you spend 4 or 5 weeks on it, and guess what? Like, that's not what we're looking for, or whatever. And so, just getting that kind of incremental feedback, which is something incredibly new, and it's so counterintuitive. It's how do you go slow to go fast? And that's I wish I would have known some of the stuff that 5 or 6 years ago that I would have wasted much time on things. Let's just say.
Yeah, there's a big difference between the Scrum and Waterfall project management methodologies, and you can definitely see how one can move a little faster. But they both have their place, right?
No, I agree. They definitely both have their place, and you got to figure out what's the right time and when to use it. But ultimately, I think if you come with the principle that it's crawl, walk, never run, and kind of the power of incrementalism on incremental feedback to make sure that you're going to have to be successful, then ultimately you're going to have a better product, and you're not going to waste much of your time or anyone else's time.
Awesome. Well, we're running up on about 20 minutes here, so we're going to cut this episode short. But Tony, will you come back and join me for another episode so we can kind of talk about not, like right after you get out, some of those, what helped you get through, and advice to other veterans that might be seeking the same path?
No, definitely, Carrie. I appreciate being on. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you again soon.